So how do you go about predicting the type of questions you're likely going to get asked during an interview? I'm talking here, of course, about the behavioral questions predominantly. The first thing you would want to keep in mind here is why are you looking to predict for these questions? And the main objective of such a prediction should be the quality of your answers. So in other words, if you have a smaller pool of questions, you could eventually improve the quality of your answers by ensuring that the quality of your stories are the best, and also the way you communicate those stories is the best possible way to achieve this. Now, there's also, of course, another scenario where you don't have time to invest in this process, but that's a less efficient of a scenario to just narrow down the types of questions even further, and you'll see in a moment why. So how do you go about this prediction process? What would the main steps involve? The first step would be that I have many lists with the most commonly asked behavioral questions, first of which is a more general one that applies to high-performing companies, to pretty much any of them. And then I also develop lists for Amazon, Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft, and Netflix, I believe. And I'll be also considering releasing others in the near future. So this will be the starting point of having a basic pool of questions. I think you'll have at most 35 of these questions in the largest of this list. Why they are a great starting point? Because they are a result of intensive research or on the more interesting scenarios of behavioral interviewing. The second step you would want to follow here is to take a look at the job description, in case you're interested, of course, to further narrow it down, which I would, of course, recommend in many cases. Now, if you're looking at the job description, that could be revealing of the types of competencies that your employer are looking for their ideal candidate. For example, in the case of software development engineers, in the case of Amazon, they are looking for mainly 4 such core competencies or leadership principles, how they call them. Which, by the way, are not the same for any type of or junior software development engineer, but it helps to take a look at the job description to identify them. And this is how you further narrow that list of possible interview questions. Now, of course, there are some questions that are likely to get asked, such as, tell me about yourself and why do you want to work here? But I'm talking about narrowing the behavioral questions here. Or another example would be a solutions architect, which is defined as someone with a unique combination of technical and interpersonal skills. So in this case, you would look for interpersonal skills, which, by the way, is a very broad area to look for in behavioral interviewing. But interpersonal skills is usually when you have to deal with others. Tell me about the time when you apologize to someone. How did you advance your ideas in a team project? And these types of questions. In the case of a salesperson, well, if you're in sales, you must sell to someone. So customers. So you should prepare, your strong point should be dealing with customers or with difficult customers. So these would be, 3 examples of roles and how you would go about about further narrowing down the types of questions you should be really prepared for in your job interview. One note here you will want to keep in mind is you should ensure that your list has both positively and negatively framed questions. For example, a positively framed question is what's your most successful project. A negatively framed one is tell me about the time when you failed. And the probability that you'll get negatively framed questions significantly increases with the seniority of the role that you're applying for. So in other words, if you're applying for a senior role, I would be surprised if you don't get a negatively framed question during your entire interview, both your phone and your on-site interviews. Of course, there's also other notes for more senior roles, for people that are expected to manage people in their roles. There are some questions, that could be related with that type of competency that you should expect. And by the way, they're not necessarily covered in all my list with the most commonly asked questions, because that's a very niche. That's a niche to what's considered a normal job description, usually in a company. So if you're applying for a role that's supposed to manage people, consider also including some questions about how you manage people and what's the best piece of advice that you gave people that you coached, or how do you go about coaching people, and these types of questions. So these would be the main steps you would want to take in order to answer narrow down the types of situations and types of questions you would likely get asked in a job interview. One final note here is This whole prediction process usually has the goal, more of an exercise to really find, some interesting questions that you would want to prepare the best possible answers for. So take it just as an exercise, of course, not as a precise thing to say, hey, if I don't get asked this question, then it's Dan's fault because his prediction model doesn't work. And last but not least, invest a limited amount of time in this prediction process, because I see too many people going with an approach such as, okay, let me spend half a day in trying to see what types of questions they might ask me for my job interview. No, that's a totally wrong approach, where you only consume content to delay your actual preparation. So you should focus on spending half an hour, maybe to narrow down the types of questions using the most commonly asked question, the job description, and the other filters that I talked about. Maybe shoot an email to your main point of contact at that company to ask them, hey, do you have a list? Can you help me here? Can you help me out here? How should I go about this? But this in total can take you 1 hour at most, right? So after you spend this 1 hour on actually perfectioning your algorithm to find the best possible questions, then, which by the way is again just an exercise, then you should really invest the time to properly tune up your stories and your answers, so they are the best. So there you go. I hope you found this information useful, and remember, if you want to support this channel, please share your interview experiences in the comment sections of the videos. Thank you.